Well, Stephen Donziger, to say that it's good to see you is an understatement. Welcome, welcome home, welcome to everything. How's your day been, babe? I know I speak for many thousands of people. We want to hear everything. For those of you who are just joining us, you've probably heard the news. Stephen Donziger has been released from Danbury Prison, and now he is in home confinement back with his family. And there is so much to this. Stephen, first of all, like I said, congratulations. And I know I ask on behalf of everyone, how did this happen? Were you awakened? What happened today? Tell us about your day.
Well, thank you, Marianne. It's an honor to really give my first interview to you since I got
Thank
out.
you.
Appreciate so much all your support over these last couple of years and what you do generally in the world to make it a better place. So I'm really happy to be
Right
here with
back at you. Takes
thank
one
you.
to know one.
So, I'm still trying to process all that I've experienced over the last 45 days. Um, Yesterday I was living in this unit called Unit M in a prison with 900 men, a serious federal prison that had been locked down because of the threat of COVID, meaning that no one could get out of their unit except maybe once a week for an hour. They were keeping all the units apart from each other to try to isolate risk of getting COVID. I mean, there were a lot of sort of issues around that I won't get into at the moment, but I was locked down. And I was in my unit, and around noon yesterday, one of the security officials came in and asked to see me, and he said, "Are you Donziger?" Took me into an office. Of course, whenever you're in prison and someone calls your name, like you don't know what it's for, and you sort of, your mind goes like, is this a good thing or a bad thing? Went into the office, and he said, "Going home tomorrow." And I said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah, it's a furlough." So the prison, for whatever reason, or the Bureau of Prisons decided to send me home. I'm still in their custody, even though I am home. And I'm going to serve, if everything goes as planned, the rest of my sentence, my 6-month sentence at home, as opposed to being in the prison. Now, overnight, I could barely sleep. And a lot of the men in the unit, there's 80 men in the unit, we had developed very tight bonds with some of them. And, it was an intense final night, a lot of talk and camaraderie and discussions and hot chocolate and, you know, just the things you do in prison where, you sort of start relying very heavily on the people around you because you're pretty much cut off from the outside. There's virtually no phone calls. There's no internet access. To send an email costs money. Most people don't have money. So you really start developing relationships on the inside that become, I think, in many respects, much more meaningful and important than what you would expect you would have on the outside, where you're cut off. So it was an intense last night, packed up stuff I needed to take out, some books, some legal papers, and some things, a journal I had kept. Um, Woke up very early this morning and still wondering, like a little birdie in the back of my mind, like, is this really happening? Or are they going to just change this decision, and I'm going to be here for 6 months or even longer? I mean, there's so many fears around, you know, having to give up control over your basic freedoms to a bureaucracy, which is essentially what happens when you go to prison. But in any event, I showered, I got dressed, I put on my prison khakis, waited at the door at 8 o'clock. That's when he said he'd come back to get me. 8 o'clock, he didn't come. It was 8:05, 8:10, he wasn't there. 8:15, 8:20, I'm like, is this really happening, or am I going to be really disappointed? And there were like a couple of guys hanging out with me and trying to keep the mood light. And eventually a gentleman came and he said, "Are you Donziger?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "You're leaving, so get your stuff, put your mask on." And then I proceeded to go through 9 doors from like a 50-yard, 100-yard space from where I was physically located to freedom. There were 9 locked doors. And they processed me out in about 20 minutes. And I went out, and my wife, Laura, and my sister, Susan, had driven up to get me. And we had quite a reunion. So here I am. I can't believe it. I want to emphasize though that I'm not free. I'm still in custody. I'm just doing it at home, and I'm hoping that that changes, because to me, the sentence never should have been imposed, not for one day.
No,
And
it should not have been.
let's not overreact to this. It's significant. It's very important, obviously, to me and my family, my mental health, my family's health, but it's not freedom.
I know that in the days and weeks to come, and longer than that, you'll be talking a lot about this case, what it means for Chevron, um, what it means for the people of Ecuador, and so forth. But I want to linger a little bit on what I know was a very life-changing experience for you, being on the inside. You had mentioned before that you had visited prisons many times as the lawyer, but never as the inmate. First of all, before we go there, though, I want to ask you a question. Was this decision made by the Bureau of Prisons, do you think?
Well, yes, it was. And just so people understand, when a judge sentences someone to federal prison, that's it. They don't have any more authority. The authority
Okay.
of custody goes 100%
Interesting.
to the prison system. And at that point, they make decisions about how they want to, fill their prisons or let people go or handle what are essentially managerial issues, for which they, in theory, have a lot of expertise. And they don't want judges interfering with that for the most
Interesting.
part. Judges can make
Interesting.
recommendations about this and that, but it would be entirely inappropriate for a judge to get involved. And I think that, I don't know, it's an opaque process. I don't know who or how the decision was made, but what I do know is, it was very obvious to everyone in the prison, both inmates and staff, that it was bizarre for me to be there.
To be there.
First of all, as a misdemeanor defendant, I was the only person with a misdemeanor of 900 men in the entire prison. They'd never seen a person with a misdemeanor. So even assuming I was guilty, which I'm not, I don't believe I am, and my case, I'll remind people, is under appeal. Even though I was guilty, people are like, what are you doing here? Like, people with that lowest level misdemeanor, don't get sentenced to prison. First time offenders, they get sentenced to probation or home confinement. So everyone found it very bizarre. And, I think the prison, there's a lot of people in prison. It's overcrowded. And, I just think they thought, for various legitimate administrative reasons, it would serve the interests of punishment and their custodial needs better if I spent time at home for the rest of my sentence, which is not easy, because essentially means I'm going to be here for another 4 months after already having been here for 22 months, pre-trial, and what was a very unfair process, as you know. So I think it was made by the Bureau of Prisons for their own reasons, and I think it's an appropriate decision.
Well, I think that we were talking last night in the event with the rest of the girls, that we didn't understand why President Biden wasn't commuting your sentence, and that is as true now as it was before. Now, I got a letter from you, Stephen, talking about how moved you were by many of the men that you met there. And you were talking at one point about how this was like pre-cell phone, where people actually spoke to one another. You talked about the way that people were just trying to survive the experience. You talked about how there were far too many people in the unit who should be there. You talked about the fact that you were with another man in a cell that was meant just for one person. You talked about open air toilets, which is such an example of the disregard for any sense of the humanity of people who are there. I know that, having had this raw, intense personal experience, which aroused in you such compassion, I know that will begin to fade. But I also know that the man you are is such that it will never completely fade. And I assume that one of the tasks, one of the issues that you will take on as you move forward, that your psyche has been seared by this. What do you want to tell us about your experience while you were there? How has it changed you? A minister friend once said to me, there is no spot where God is not. And God's in prison, just like God's outside, because God's in all of our hearts. What do you want people to know And how has it changed you and your views of the U.S. Justice system?
Yeah, I'm processing it still, but I'll say this. I think the most palpable pain I feel from the experience is the way a bureaucracy can be created by design to disrespect human beings. And obviously it's prison, and many people in prison have broken the law. And I'm not saying it should be the Hilton Hotel, but what you want it to be is a place that recognizes the humanity of every person in it, because it's the right thing to do, number one, and number two, it's the effective thing to do to lower crime in our society, but by treating people with respect and trying to rehabilitate them, so when they get out, they won't have a 65% recidivism rate, which is what the federal prison system has right now. It's a system that is failing to accomplish its mission. And when you stick a toilet, open air toilet in a room that's 60 square feet shared by two people, somebody's head is going to be sleeping about 6 inches away from the edge of that toilet. And it sort of sits there and reminds you every day in some way of how worthless the system thinks you are. And then you take meals in your cell because of COVID, and you're eating next to a toilet that's
I think a
open.
lot.
There's no seat on the toilet. I don't want to, I don't want to obsess about toilets, but it's an example of something.
No, it's an example of something. It's an example of something. I think many Americans do, but many Americans do not realize how different, how punitive, on top of punishment. There's the consciousness of punishment, and then there's the consciousness of rehabilitation. And compared to many other countries, the United States insists on a consciousness of punishment as opposed to rehabilitation, which does nothing more than to make our prison schools for crime.
Yeah.
And it's not the way to lower your rate of recidivism, et cetera. Is there anything particularly, do you see, I know you still have so much to do holding Chevron accountable. You have so much to do making sure that the recompense is made towards people of Ecuador, et cetera. But do you see yourself becoming more of a prison activist in the future because of this experience?
I don't know. Maybe. I mean, this is the thing. I believe in justice, for all peoples. And there's no way that this intense experience that I've had and continue to have, because I still have relationships back in the prison, is going to not improve me as a human being and broaden my perspective on what's possible in terms of advocacy. It's going to happen. It's happening. So, and one thing people might not know about me is before I got involved in environmental justice work, I actually was involved in prison work. I actually edited a book in 1996 published by HarperCollins called The Real War on Crime. I was executive director of something called the National Criminal Justice Commission. And it was incredible. And I did that job as an academic, sort of coming out of Harvard Law School at the time. I was a young lawyer. And I wrote about many of the things that were problematic back then, including the prison industrial complex and sort of prisons for profit and the business side of why this system continues to perpetuate itself in the way that it does and ostensibly fail. And to then go in, myself into the system 25 years later and see some of its darkest aspects it's just incredible. I mean, think about it. I wrote a book about this in 1996. And now I'm in that dark system myself, noticing from the other side of the fence the very things I'd studied and written about, and even in worse condition, really, than they were back in the 1990s, when there was this huge anti-crime political wave that helped get Bill Clinton elected in 92 and 96. The establishment of these insanely long mandatory minimum sentences for relatively minor crimes. And other problems that have led to the stuffing of our prisons with bodies, with raw material, unlike any other country in the world. I mean, we don't have any more. We don't have any, people don't realize, we have 68 million people in America. It's 1 out of 5 people with some sort of criminal record, been in the system. We have 25% of the world's prison population, 5% of the world's population. Okay. It's not because we have more crime. It's because our sentences are so long. We live in a punitive society. And I
Right.
can't tell you that the people I met through this experience were, most of them had sentences that to me just simply did not fit the offense. I mean, they were just insanely long sentences for seemingly minor nonviolent offenses. Um, and it really makes one question what's going on,
That's right.
including
During the
mine.
19,
Yeah, I'm saying, yeah, I had
during,
a 6-month fence. You're like, oh, that's such a short offense. It'll go by in 5 seconds. So what are you worried about? Someone with 15-year sentence is telling me this. And I'm like, yeah, but you know what? To me, it's an eternity because I shouldn't be
yeah,
there. So
right,
grabbing a lawyer in for contempt of court, which is really
right,
callous legal advocacy for my clients to
right.
challenge a judge, is in its own way another example of like the system just grabbing more and more people, putting them
Yeah.
in for sentences
Mhm.
that are either shouldn't be happening to begin with or just way too long.
Well, during the 1970s, there were 300,000 people imprisoned in the United States, and now it's 2.3 million.
Yeah.
And we know it is the proverbial prison industrial complex. And as you said, the laws that were created taking away from judges the opportunity to apply their own sense of ethics, their own sense of justice, mandatory sentences, et cetera. You also told me today, and I think it's a little obvious looking at you, how long were you in there?
45 days.
40, and you lost 25 pounds. Tell us about the food.
I was shocked. I mean, look, I don't expect, you know,
Gourmet meals.
lobster and filet mignon, believe me, it's prison. But
Mm.
like the food was terrible and the portions were way too small and there were no vegetables. I literally had access to one carrot in 45
Oh
days.
my God.
I ate. It was like my carrot. I take a bite every day. I just kept it around for 10 days. I mean, and there's no lettuce, there were no salads. The vegetables came out of a can when they did serve them. A breakfast meal might be grits and a piece of bread. You know, I couldn't believe it. And what it really does is it forces the people living there to spend their own money to go to what's called the prison commissary, where they sell a great deal of junk food. I mean, I would say the most popular item people buy is Doritos. And they often go back to the dorms and they cook their own meals. They'll get rice, some sausage, it's all processed, um, Doritos, and, pretty creative cooking actually, but there's no vegetables. The diets are not balanced. And personally, I really had a hard time with it. I mean, I'm not going to lie, I like a good meal. But there was just not enough food. I lost a lot of weight. Now, I think a lot of that was stress and just not being comfortable. I found myself somewhat at war with being there. Like I didn't want to get comfortable. I didn't want it to become normal. When you serve a 5 or 10 or 20, 30-year sentence, I mean, there was a guy literally next door to me. I'm there in a misdemeanor. He had been convicted of a gang murder when he was 19. He was now 37. He'd been in prison 17 years. Think about that. The nicest guy, by the way, he'd been rehabilitated. He was an amazing, kind person. And, I just fought getting comfortable. Now everyone says, well, get comfortable because what does it matter? You're going to do your time. It'll go by faster if you get comfortable, if you don't count the days, you don't think about the outside. I couldn't do that. I didn't do that. And believe me, it was excruciating. I mean, literally every minute of every day was tough. I mean, also there's very few clocks on the walls and there's no mirrors. I forgot what I looked like. I swear to you, until today, I had not looked in a mirror and seen my body and seen how thin I got.
Well,
There's no, I
I'm
forgot
sure
what
Laura will have a lot of to say about that. And I'm sure with the love of your family and friends, food will be weight will be put back on your bones. But that's extraordinary to think that there are people who've been there for years and have not been able to look in a mirror. So were you able to feel, could you tell while you were in how many of us were doing what we could on the outside?
Yeah, so there were a couple of things that were just extraordinarily important to me. I mean, number one is I got a lot of letters from people all over the world, and I want to credit Amnesty International, Ali Gerard, and Daniel Jaloy, who did incredible work. They put out an urgent action bulletin about my case. Um, prior to me going into prison, to hundreds of thousands of their supporters around the world. And I literally got hundreds of letters. I mean, became kind of a camp thing in the unit where when the mail would come at the end of the day, they call out people's names, and they kept calling my name, and I'd walk away with like a stack of letters. People were like, my God, you got more letters today than I've gotten in 10 years. They would say that. And so I made it, or tried to make it, a more of a community thing. And I said, look, I don't know 98% of these people writing me personally, but I explained a little bit about why they're writing and about the importance of my case to them and to our society and to our democracy. And I would invite people to open the letters with me and read them. And it became a fun kind of thing we would do on the nights the mail came, but I have to tell people that when you're in prison for, I think, political reasons, as I believe I was,
Yes.
to get letters from people of support, oh my God, how much it matters. It's we also forget in the age of the internet and email, like actually writing out your handwriting and the time it takes. And it's like another layer of meaning to see someone's handwriting and to see them write out a letter and take the time to put it in an envelope, put a stamp on it, and mail it. I mean, I wish I brought all my letters home. I need to figure out how to do something with them. I want people to be able to see not only what's in the letters, but how important the process of writing letters is. And by the way, just because I'm out of prison, please keep writing letters if you want, but just write them to my home.
Yeah. You wrote me in a letter saying that you had gotten letters from almost every state in the United States, every province in Canada, and people all over, and from people in countries around the world. And I would recommend, I know that there are letter writing projects to inmates, as you said, how much it would mean to someone inside, particularly all these nonviolent offenders or people who really, I remember I was working on this issue when I was living in Michigan, and there was a woman who at the time was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Michigan, and she was the one who said to me, "It's too easy to get in, and it's too hard to get out." And that's how she described the U.S. prison system: too easy to get in and too hard to get out. If you put on freedonziger.com your connection to anything like the Women's Clemency Project or any of the other projects where we can be of use and of service, I think that would be a really beautiful way that people can continue our activism related to this. What do you want us to know? I don't want to abuse your time tonight. I know every moment to hug your wife and son matters to you tonight, and I'm sure to eat and to talk to so many people who love you and are so happy that you're back. What do you want us to know, though? Moving forward, how should we continue? What is the activism part of all this that you would have us keep in mind? Because this thing is not over. As you yourself have said here, you're not at Danbury anymore, but you are in home confinement. This doesn't mean Chevron has been held accountable and so forth. Tell us what to do.
Oh, sure. I mean, first and foremost is my freedom and obviously justice for the indigenous peoples and farmer communities in Ecuador who have been suffering now for decades because of Chevron's pollution. They've yet to collect on the judgment that they won against Chevron. So, all that information, again, go to freedonziger.com. We are engaged in a pretty intense fundraising campaign. There's many reasons for this. We have, expenses to pay lawyers to both win my freedom, but also to hold Chevron fully accountable. We need support. So if you can give, please give. If you can't give, we understand. We love you anyway. Sign up for the campaign. Tell people about it. Again, it's freedonziger.com. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
When I talked to you earlier today, you had not yet seen the event that we did last night with Crystal Ball and Katie Halper Show, Brianna Joy Gray. There were some marvelous guests on. And Lucy Lawless did a magnificent job of describing to us the situation in Ecuador, what the people have suffered and continue to suffer. Your friends did real good by you. Your lawyers were magnificent. Paul was magnificent. Chris Hedges was magnificent. Richard Wolff was magnificent. Nina Turner, Susan Sarandon. And I think that we do all want to know what do we do now and how to continue the struggle.
So, and first of all, just to hear all those names and all this just happened. You guys put it together and so many people helped organize it. And I had nothing to do with it. By the way, it's very humbling because like almost everything that happens, like, I got to do this, I got to do that. And I was like, actually, I don't need to do all that. There's so much interest now in this. It's almost taken on a life of its own. And it's just so incredibly encouraging. And I'm so moved that you and others came together in the way you did last night. Just to hear you list those names, it's just very moving to me.
Well, everybody was happy to be there to do what we could. And you can just imagine how overjoyed we all are. You said to me in a letter that this is about galvanizing a movement to hold polluters accountable. This has to do with particularly the treatment of indigenous peoples, the original crime by Texaco in the 1960s, no less, before there was any kind of mainstream impulse really addressing mistreatment of indigenous cultures, not only in Latin America, but also in the United States, in Canada. And this is, of course, going on today, the issues of the pipelines, et cetera. One of the things we talked about last night, Stephen, that we will want to hear more from you and your lawyers about is this loophole has got to be closed. I think that the prosecution of an American citizen by a corporation, most of us, I know and I speak for many people, we're appalled to know that this could even exist. So I know a lot of people were awakened by this case and we want to just continue. We know that it's not over.
Well, I'd like to say this in response to that. I mean, we're thinking through next steps in terms of what the objectives of organizing should be. An important one that we're working on, and I think will be announced by Amnesty soon, is Joe Biden needs to take note of this and do something about it. Like, you cannot be a climate president and allow your environmental justice lawyers to be locked up in your own country. Like, we're not that country. And like, I get there's huge corporate influence, even dominance of our government in America right now, which is a serious problem. But even with that, we can't be that country. And on my appeal, I was lucky enough to have Professor Stephen Vladeck from the University of Texas argue for me. Excuse me, he's a member of the Federalist Society. There are people on the right, the left, the middle who are totally offended by the abuse of power, the violations of the rule of law, executed by Judge Kaplan, Judge Preska, Rita Glavin, the private Chevron prosecutor, against me. And, we've all realized, Marianne, that it's not just about Steve Donziger anymore. Like, I'm just a symbol for something much more nefarious and dangerous for our body politic, for our democracy, for our freedom. And I think that's why people are really becoming involved and getting galvanized by this. And the other thing is, like, for people to understand the connection between the attacks on lawyers, in my case, me, and saving our planet. I mean, the reality is the Chevrons of the world do not want the Steve Donzigers of the world to be successful at their work because it holds major polluters accountable in a way that completely undermines a business model that is destroying where we live. It's destroying our world. So, they don't see this just as a one-off case where they want to avoid paying the people of Ecuador the money they owe them for polluting and poisoning their ancestral lands. They actually see this as the need to destroy a model on our side that can help save the planet by holding major polluters accountable and forcing a paradigm shift in their planet-destroying practices such that they won't threaten the earth anymore. That's what they're really scared of with me. And I think that's why they're going after me with 60 law firms, 2,000 lawyers, and essentially taking over the machinery of the public prosecution to jail me, for crying out loud. And I want to credit the Bureau of Prisons on this point. I think they saw what was happening, okay? I don't know how this decision was made to let me come home, but there are good people in our society. There are good people even in a bureaucracy that has needs and needs to improve. There are still good people. There are still people who take their duties seriously. And I just want to credit those in our world, be they clerks in courthouses or, guards in institutions, prison guards in prisons, policymakers all over the place, congressional staff have been so instrumental, in the NGO world, Amnesty, Paul Poss from Amazon Watch, and of course, journalists like you and Katie and Crystal and Brianna. I mean, we have good people in our society who are really fending off these dynamics that I think threaten to destroy our democracy in a critical moment. So I want to acknowledge you and everyone else who does the good work to keep people like me alive.
Well, we are inspired by you because of what you have done for the people of Ecuador. And as you said, and as we discussed quite extensively last night, the problem here is a business model of short-term profits at all cost. That's really the evil here that is eating our democracy, and as it is shown in your case, its willingness to be absolutely vicious, soul destroying, and even body destroying on a very personal level to anyone who dares to challenge it. That's why we're there for you, Stephen. We love you because of the love that you have shown for people who were very powerless, who have been hurt. And part of what's so beautiful here is, as excited, I know I speak for many, so happy for you that you're home, in the arms of your wife and son. So happy you can go now, have a wonderful meal, have a wonderful time. But we also know that when the time comes, you won't shut up. You'll continue. Yes. What were you going to say?
I just want to say one thing. This is kind of off the point, but I got to say this. Getting back to the prison issue. Thank you for all that. But getting back to the prison issue. People in prison need legal help. I want to just say that. Okay. And I want to call out Yale Law School, which is down the street from Danbury Prison. Organize a clinic in Danbury Prison to help these inmates deal with the issues they have. One thing I notice is when you get sentenced, that's phase one. Advocacy has to continue once you're on the inside. There's all sorts of ways you can deal with shortening your sentence, the CARES Act, compassionate release, motions. And I don't understand why there's two law schools right near Danbury, Yale and Quinnipiac. I'm asking students at those schools to think about figuring out a way they can, cut their chops in a clinic where they can actually work in the prison to help people. I can't tell you the need. Everybody has a need and no one can get access to lawyers. Very few, I should say.
Did you hear that, Yale Law School? Did you hear that, law students? You're going to these prestigious law schools and they're going to try to suck you into the system. That's not what you're there for. As my father used to say, the law is a weapon. My father was an immigration lawyer. It should be a weapon trying to tear down unjust systems, not to be sucked into serving an unjust system. When I lived in Michigan, the students at University of Michigan who were involved in the Women's Clemency Project there, a lot of the good work done in the field of prison activism has to do with law students and law schools. So like you, Stephen, to call out, we're not going to leave this without calling out somebody who needs to be called out. You heard us, Yale Law School, and law students throughout the country who have shown great support for you. The galvanizing effect that you've been about ethics and conscience among those in the legal profession, those training to be in it. I want to let you go, Stephen. I want to let you go back to your family. I love you.
We'll continue to talk.
Thank you.
I love you, Marianne. By the way, your book is in the prison library. I meant to tell you that. One of your books. I saw it.
That makes me happy. Happy. It's a cause dear to my heart. Much love to you. Okay. God bless you, everybody. Thank you, everyone. FreeDonziger.com. Help with those legal fees if you can. FreeDonziger.com. All my best, Stephen. Talk to you later.